Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd Family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. If you jump on here live here on this Sunday evening, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. Make sure to give the video a like, a thumbs up. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so, and share the video on all social media platforms. Today's video is going to be college football. I'm not going to mention the two games from Friday night that I talked about yesterday because I talked about them yesterday. Now, I know there was a third game Friday night, but I don't think anybody cares about that one. Hey there, Austin. Glad to have you here, but the two that I feel like were at least somewhat relevant from Friday night I talked about in last night's video. So tonight I'm just going to talk about all the relevant or somewhat relevant games from yesterday. Had quite a few overtime games this week. You don't see a lot of overtime games in one day, but we had it this week. And as always, if you jump on here as we go along, feel free to chit chat with me and leave some comments as we go. Today, Austin, I was at formerly Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now it's Echo Park Speedway, but it's always been in Hampton, which is a kind of a, I'd say not small, but not big town, just past Atlanta, so they call it Atlanta Motor Speedway, but it's not Atlanta, it's Hampton, and they changed the name, I guess about 3 months ago to Echo Park Speedway, but they do still have NASCAR races there twice a year. But the Georgia State Fair is going on this weekend and this week, and they're doing it where you would be parking if there was a NASCAR race going on. So it's not inside the racetrack, it's outside the racetrack. But they had wrestling there. UCW is part of the Georgia State Fair, so we had wrestling at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So I had to leave church, drive to Atlanta, and I've been back home for 10 minutes, maybe. Hopefully it'll be on YouTube sometime, Austin. I'm not sure because UCW, which is the place I refed at, they have their own, not their own television network, but it's a channel that carries wrestling, and we come on there, and they want everybody to get that channel on your tablet or mobile device, whatever you use to watch TV on. So I don't know if it'll be on YouTube or not because of that, but you can at least go to Title Match Network and download that channel on your device, and it'll be on there sometime or another. And Pigman, glad to have you here on this Sunday night. We're talking college football. And Jacob, thank you for asking, but I work on most Saturdays now. Unfortunately, unless I ask off, I work every Saturday. So I'll be working during your birthday party, but I am glad to know that you're fixing to celebrate another birthday, but I'll be working, so think of me at work, working my tail off during your birthday party. I don't think it's free, Austin. I'm not sure. You can go look and check, but it's not just a UCW channel. It's a TV channel that carries pretty much all boxing and all wrestling all the time. So if you have to pay $5 or $6, you're not paying just to watch UCW. You're paying for the entire channel, and it's well worth your time if you like wrestling, because they carry a lot of wrestling, and they also carry a lot of bios about wrestling and things like that. So it's not a wrestling channel, but there's a ton of wrestling on there. Cool kid, glad to have you here. But Ohio State is really good, and I know they're the defending national champions, and they lost a lot of talent off last year's team. Hey there, Dooney, glad to have you here. But they still have the two best players in America one on offense, one on defense. And, Julian saying, he had a really good game yesterday, but overall, he's at least up at this point nothing like the quarterbacks they've had in the last 10 years. But I don't think he has to be because their defense was phenomenal last year, and it may be better this year than it was last year. So Ohio State, in most of their games, if not all their games, if they score 21, they're not losing. My weekend was fantastic. Okie, thank you for asking. I appreciate it, man. I've been on vacation from work, so I've been very, very busy this week doing all the things that I normally don't get to do because of work. Hey there, Hayden. Glad to have you here. And Hayden, I think it's your first time here on the channel, at least that I can recall. So if it is your first time being here, whatever made you stop by the channel tonight, I greatly appreciate it. If it is your first time here, feel free to give the video a like, a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. Hey there, Lucky Shots. Glad to have you here. But Okie, I did some of the things I haven't had a chance to do, throughout the week since I was on vacation. You always work harder on vacation than you do when you're not on vacation. And then I had wrestling last night and wrestling tonight. So it was a wrestling weekend, which I love. I've got another wrestling show next Saturday. The next weekend, I have a show Saturday and a show Sunday. The next weekend, I have one Saturday, one Sunday, and one Monday. So I love it. I love being in the ring. I want to do it while I still can. But I had a fantastic weekend, Okie. I hope you did as well. But Ohio State won again yesterday. They beat Washington 24-6 in one of many overtime games. Oregon in double overtime. Hey there, Eddie. You're just in time, man. I've been intending on talking college football, but I had so many comments that I just mentioned the first game, and that was Ohio State beating Washington 24-6. Oregon in double overtime defeated Penn State 30-24. And, I was thinking about that game, earlier in the week because that was a game where I could easily see either team winning it. And it looked at one time like Oregon was going to win, not in blowout fashion, but be able to shut down Penn State's offense. And Oregon went up 17-3. But then Penn State came back and tied it 17-17, and then they win it in double overtime to Oregon. But I was thinking, everybody hates James Franklin, so everybody says James Franklin can't win the big game, which to me, when you tell me can't win the big game to me is national championship. So in my mind, how can you say that James Franklin can't win the big game when James Franklin has yet to play in the big game? But everybody says James Franklin can't win the big game, and yes, it was, Eddie, and I'm going to get to that coming up here in a few minutes, so please stick around for that. But I was thinking about Oregon. Nobody talks about Oregon or Dan Lanning, but look at all the good years Chip Kelly had there, but never won a national championship. And then Mario Cristobal came along and had some good years and never won a national championship. And Dan Lanning has come along, and as of yet, even though he hasn't been there for a long period of time, has yet to win a national championship. But everybody talks about James Franklin can't win the big game, but nobody talks about Oregon. And they've been pretty much a top 5 team just about every year for 20 or 25 years. So with Oregon, it's not a coach problem. It seems like a team problem because they've had 3 coaches now with a huge amount of success and have not won anything. But nobody will talk about Oregon, but they'll talk about James Franklin and Penn State. Why is that? Maybe if you go out west and you live, maybe not in Oregon, but close to Oregon, like California, Utah, Montana, somewhere out there, you hear people talk about it. But I don't really hear people talk about it, a whole lot. Hey there, Kayla. Glad to have you here. And Austin SWA is coming up in 2 weeks. They're going to have 2 shows in October, one the second Saturday, and one the fourth Saturday. So I'll be there again in 2 weeks. And Kayla, yes, I am, and good luck to you. I hope it works out well for you. But Kayla, I've learned a lot in my walk with Christ, and one thing I've learned is if you try to push it on people, it doesn't help. It makes them go the other way. And Okie Light, I'm not convinced, as much as other people are, that James Franklin can't win the big game, because to me, like I said, to me, you have to play in the big game before I can say you can't win it. And James Franklin's never played in one, and Penn State is by far way better now than they were before he came along. But for the most part, when they lose to teams that are better than they are, like losing last night to Oregon. Oregon's better than they are. So I can't sit here and say, oh, Franklin choked again. No, to me, choking is a game when you're supposed to win and you don't. Like if Penn State is 10-0 and they're lining up to play Rutgers and you lose to Rutgers, you choked. But when two top 5 teams play, one has to lose. So just because you lost the game doesn't mean you choked. It means you played a great team and they beat you. Somebody has to lose. And he does have 2 great coordinators, Okie, but he has great coordinators every year. And about every year, either one of the 2 leaves or both leave. And then the next year he'll bring on more and they leave. So James Franklin must be hard to work with. And the funny thing about last year was, he had Tom Allen. They had a phenomenal defense. But Tom Allen left to go to Clemson. Now he's at Clemson. And, of course, he's been there 4 games, and now you've got Clemson fans ready to get rid of the guy already. But I read an article, I guess, back probably in March or April that said one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that Tom Allen left Penn State was because James Franklin put him in the booth and he wanted to be on the field. Hey there, James. Glad to have you here. And when you say your state football, I don't know what you're talking about, but it's good to have you here. Nevertheless, but then he goes to Clemson and he's up in the booth. So if it was true that he left Penn State because he wanted to be on the field, then it didn't do any good to leave Penn State because you want to be on the field and then go to Clemson and you're still not on the field. And James, I'm not a Chicago Bears fan at all. So I guess that's why I was confused when you said your state, because I didn't know if you meant the actual state you think I'm in, or if you meant, a football team like has state in their name, like Florida State, Tennessee State, North Carolina State. I wasn't sure what you meant when you said state, and I am not a Chicago Bears fan. I'm also not a Alabama fan, James, but it is good to have you here. Nevertheless, but Ole Miss beat LSU 24-19. The funny thing about that game was Lane Kiffin's daughter, I want to say her name is Landry, but don't quote me on that, came out probably Monday or Tuesday and said that she was now dating the LSU linebacker. I want to say it's Whit Weeks, but don't quote me on that because LSU has 2 defensive players and they're brothers, and both of them's last name is Weeks, and both of them's first name starts with a W. But I think it's Whit is the one she's dating. So you had Lane Kiffin's daughter dating the LSU linebacker. And I am a Clemson fan, James, and I'm glad you had to ask because that tells me that I don't hammer Clemson here on the channel, which is a good thing because that's not my intention. Yeah, I have Clemson stuff all in the background, so if you look, it's pretty obvious who I cheer for, but this is in no means a Clemson channel, and I do many videos where I never talk about Clemson. So the fact that you had to ask, James, makes me know that I'm doing a good job of not being a Clemson homer. So I appreciate that. And I'm a Clemson fan in every sport. Some people, they claim, they like, I'll give you an example. I knew a guy at one time that claimed he was a Clemson fan in football. He was a Kansas fan in college basketball. But then in college baseball, he liked another powerhouse team. So it just so happened that in each individual sport, whichever team is the best, that's who you pull for. And he also liked the Packers in the NFL, the Yankees in baseball. Oh, so you just so happen to jump on a great team in every sport. I don't do that. I'm a Clemson fan at football, baseball, basketball, soccer, volleyball, rowing. If Clemson's got a team, that's who I pull for. And Tim, glad to have you here. And Lupita, I hope that is the correct way to say your name. Good to have both of y'all here. And Tim, to answer your question, no, Dabo's not getting fired. And no, Dabo should not get fired. Now, he may make the choice to step down. I doubt it, but he might. But as far as him getting fired, no, that's not going to happen. And they do suck at football, James, but just like I was saying about Clemson a while ago, Clemson could all of a sudden have the worst team at football, baseball, basketball, soccer, golf, in every sport, and I would still pull for Clemson. I can't just pull for Clemson because I think they're good. I pull for them because they're just my team. And I think they're going to be better without Calipari coming up in a couple of years. To me, James, you could tell this past season already that they're a better team without Calipari. Just give them a chance. I think Calipari leaving was actually a good thing for Kentucky. And Eddie, it's funny how so many people ask that now because Dabo is what looks like having a bad season. And I say looks like because, yeah, they're off to a terrible start, but they could come out after this bye week and win their last 8 games and then finish 9-3. Then all of a sudden, everything going on now gets forgotten about. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, but it's possible. But you don't have 15 straight good years and then have one bad season and get fired. Hey there, Angetta. Glad to have you here. Well, he's only been gone 2 years, James, but he coached there for 900 years, and he only won 1 national championship. So it's not like, and let's don't pretend like Calipari won the multiple titles. He didn't. He coached there 900 years, and he won 1 national title. And if you look at the roster they had that year, anybody could have coached that year and won a national championship. They could have went out there without a coach that year and won the national championship. And I don't know who that is, Angetta, so I can't say. And it was Gundy's 20th year. Okie, and I think I talked about that earlier in the week. It might have been Thursday, maybe, or Tuesday one. I talked about, how long he had been the coach and everything he had done. But, Mike Gundy had made a name for himself in a bad way. I mean, very, very rarely did you hear anybody actually say anything good about Mike Gundy. It was at least where I am. Now, I can't speak about in the Stillwater area, but I know when I listened to national shows, most people disliked Mike Gundy. When I hear people in magazines or on the radio, local shows I listen to, most people talk bad about Mike Gundy. If you read articles about Cowboy fans, most people didn't say good things about Mike Gundy. So I think they were just waiting on a reason to fire him. And you look dumb even if you hate the guy when he's winning. But then all of a sudden last year, it turned around. They were just flat out awful. And then just because they had been so good for so long and then they were so awful last year, I watched a lot of Oklahoma State practice and interviews with coaches and players. And normally I don't do that. but I just wanted to get a sense and get a vibe of, where I thought they were going this year. And then I watched Mike Gundy's next to last press conference before the season started, and you could tell by his demeanor and the way he talked and the way he acted that he knew his team was terrible without coming out and saying it. And then he came right back after the first, I think, or second game and talked about how NIL has changed everything. And I thought, you know what? This guy's pretty much sucking and admitting to you he sucks and trying to find reasons why he sucks. So I knew the writing was only on the wall, and it was a matter of time after that. But, people have always disliked him. And I don't know much about him except for what I hear in interviews and stuff, and he comes across as a very arrogant guy and always has, but things like that are things that people overlook when you're winning. But then all of a sudden when you're losing, it comes back on you. Kind of like you look at Georgia. Georgia now every year for 5 years in the off season has bukus and bukus of players get arrested for speeding. And they're not just speeding a little bit. I mean, they're speeding a lot. I mean, they're going like 125-mile-an-hour zone. And then they even had one year where somebody got killed because of it. And what's happened to Kirby? Nothing. Why? Because Georgia's winning. All of a sudden, if Kirby was to have 2 or 3 straight bad seasons, then it would be, well, he's got to go because look what's happening in the offseason. People overlook stuff as long as you're winning. And James, no, that's my point. John Wall and Anthony Davis were the one team that won a national championship. But that year, anybody could have won a national championship. But I'm glad you're a Kentucky fan nonetheless. But Eddie, back to my Dabo comment I never got to finish was, for some reason, people all of a sudden, this day and time, when you have one bad season, they forget everything you've done and act like you all of a sudden overnight forgot how to coach and forgot what you're doing. And he knows what he's doing, but people have always hated Dabo, Eddie, and I'm not sure why, because he seems like a very genuine guy. I've actually met Dabo personally, shook his hand, and he is a very nice guy. So why people hate him so much, I've never understood and still don't. And everything Dabo says is 100% truthful and the way he actually feels. And, pretty much just about every year he fires a coach. Last year, fired the DC. 2 years ago, fired the OC. Before that, fired the OC. But people always talk, oh, Dabo don't fire coaches. Well, he does it all the time. And thank you for subscribing, Ryan. I really appreciate that. And not only that, but he's using the transfer portal. But folks still come out and say he doesn't use it. I don't know why. But people say stuff like that. But you can't be Dabo and coach at a program that's been mediocre for as long as they were and then come in there and turn the program around and have 15 straight good seasons and then have one bad season and then all of a sudden say, oh, well, fire the guy. Now, say they don't come back and have a good season. They do finish 4-8. It'll all be forgotten next year if he comes back and wins 9 or 10 games. But if he goes 4-8 this year and then goes 4-8 next year and then goes 4-8, 5-7, and 27, then I understand all the talk about it. But one bad season, no, you have to let that go. And it may not be a bad season. It's a bad start. But it doesn't mean you can't turn it around. Hey there, Wyatts. Glad to have you here. Hey there, Random Stuff. Glad to have you here. Alabama beats Georgia 24-21. I said here on the channel this past week that, I thought Georgia would win the game, but I was pulling for Alabama because I think everybody knows by now that I can't stand Georgia. I'll pull for anybody that plays Georgia. but I'm also very transparent and very honest when I talk about games here on the channel. And Georgia looks like the better team. Georgia has the better talent. Georgia should have won the game, but for whatever reason, Georgia just can't beat Alabama. So, although I wanted Bama to win, and I'm glad Bama won, I thought Georgia was a better team, so I expected Georgia to win the game. I have no clue what the point spread was. That stuff doesn't matter to me. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't. But when I pick a winner of a game, I pick them based on who I think is a better team, not based on what a point spread says. That stuff means nothing to me. But for whatever reason, Georgia just can't beat Alabama. I think Bama could be 1-11, and Georgia could be 11-0, and they play each other. And I think Bama would win the game. But Kirby Smart has to decide that and figure out that football's 4 quarters. He done the same thing against Tennessee. Against Tennessee, they played like absolute dog doo-doo in the first half, and then they made some adjustments, and then they, came out and they were able to win the game. Did the same thing last night. They looked like the worst team in college football in the first half, especially on defense against Bama. And then, they made adjustments. Second half was a little better on defense. But when you play top 5, top 10 teams, you can't get behind every single game and expect to come back. Eventually, it comes back to haunt you, and it did. Hey there, Joe. Glad to have you here. And hey there, Christopher. Glad to have you here. And I'm not saying he won't turn it around. He might. But, he did that against Tennessee and the same thing against Bama. They look awful in the first half, and then they come back. But halftime adjustments don't mean anything if the game is out of reach. It's almost like Kirby says, well, we'll go out there and we'll see how the first half goes and see what's got to get better, what's got to change, and then we'll change to halftime. Well, halftime, if the game's over with, it's too late. I mean, you can play a team like Kentucky and have a bad first half and be okay. But when you play Tennessee or Alabama or Oklahoma or Texas and you get behind at halftime by 3 or 4 scores, more often than not, it's too late to adjust. Yeah, you might make it a competitive game and come back, make it close, but you're going to get beat. Hey there, T-Bone. Glad to have you here. Texas A&M beats Auburn 16-10. Indiana beats Iowa 20-15. Iowa State wins again. They remain undefeated over Arizona 39-14. The aforementioned Tennessee in overtime beats Mississippi State 41-34. Mississippi State's a team that you can see them going in the right direction. If Lebby, who is their head coach, doesn't get a better job, Mississippi State will be a really good program in about 2 more years. Georgia Tech, also in overtime, defeats Wake Forest 30-29. Illinois defeats USC 34-32. The Battle of Athen Kalliakmanis goes to Minnesota. They defeat Rutgers 31-28. And I say that because, for one, I like saying the name Athen Kalliakmanis, but he used to be the quarterback at Minnesota. He transferred to Rutgers, so his old team gets the better of his new team 31-28. Duke all over Syracuse. Syracuse lost their quarterback, peanut butter and jelly, for the year, and they look hideous without him. Louisville comes from behind. They were down 17-0, and they come back and defeat Pittsburgh 34-27. Kansas State defeats Central Florida 34-20. In the battle of 2 just awful football teams where somebody had to win, Northwestern defeats UCLA 17-14. California defeats Boston College 28-24. Cincinnati defeats Kansas 37-34. Utah all over West Virginia 48-14. 14. Okie Lights team, Oklahoma State, falls to Baylor 45-27. In a game that I wrote down just because you don't see scores like this anymore, San Diego State defeats Northern Illinois by the score of 6-3. Navy beats Rice 21-13. Virginia Tech gets their first win under interim coach Philip Montgomery. They defeat NC State 23-21. So the Hokies have played one game without Brent Pry, and they look better already. Memphis wins again. They defeat Florida Atlantic 55-26. Stanford defeats San Jose State 30-29. Boise State defeats Appalachian State 47-14. And South Carolina all over Kentucky. That's a game that's usually close. It wasn't this year. They beat Kentucky 35-13. They don't like being called Central Florida. The fans get upset if you don't call them UCF. Some people are like that, Okie Light. You know, it amazes me because, you know, Central Florida has websites that say Central Florida. You can get on the internet and read about Central Florida. And then if you're watching a football game and their score comes across the bottom of the screen, it doesn't say UCF. It'll say CENFL, which obviously means Central Florida. It's just like a few years back, the Gamecock fans in Columbia, South Carolina were getting mad saying they wanted to be called USC. And it's like, you can't be USC because the real USC is in Southern California. If people start calling you USC, people aren't going to know which USC you are. To me, stuff like that is just so childish. I don't understand it. You get called hillbillies from Hoosiers all day, and somehow we manage. And Donna, my thoughts on Miami and Florida State. By the way, Donna, good to have you here. My thoughts are, I think Miami's the better team, and Miami should win. I was hoping Florida State would have won Friday night. That way, you know, if they're number 8 and they win, there's a possibility they reach the top 5, especially with Georgia losing and Penn State losing and LSU losing. So you would have been nostalgic, feeling like the old days all of a sudden when you've got Miami and Florida State playing and both teams are inside the top 5. But, you know, Florida State's obviously not going to be in the top 5 now, but, you know, they're still ranked. I think it'll be a good game. Miami and Florida State's always a good game because those two programs despise each other. But Miami's the better team, so unless they just go in there and they pull a Mario Cristobal, Miami will win the game because they're the better team. But I don't expect it to be no blowout. Donna, I did a Florida State preview back probably, I don't know, I'm guessing late July, early August, and I had them going 6-6. They're a little better than what I thought they'd be, so maybe they get to 7 or 8 wins, but I think 8 wins is their ceiling. That's the best they do, but I still think Miami is better than they are. But even if I somehow turn out to be right and Florida State goes 6-6, yeah, that's still not a great record, but it's a whole heck of a lot better than they were last season, and it's not even close. James, I would like to see Florida State win as well. I'm just not a Miami fan. I'm not a Florida State fan either, but of the two, I despise Florida State less than I despise Miami, but I've just never been a Hurricane fan, and something about Mario Cristobal's face, when I see that man, I want to punch him right in the nose. I don't know what it is, but something about that man's face, to me, he has a very punchable face. But any thoughts on any of this, please feel free to let me know. Congratulations to you, Eddie. It was the one time a year I pulled for Alabama, and I was so scared they were going to let me down, but they pulled it out. So now if Bama does not win a game the rest of the season, I'd be happy with it because they beat Georgia. And I absolutely despise Georgia, so I was okay with it. But let's go ahead and get our Dad joke of the day in here. Today I learned if you turn a canoe over, you can wear it as a hat because it's capsized. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.